And we are back for Overanalyzing House of the Dragon, our series on how it came to be Rhaenyra's blacks faced off against Aegon's greens. After once again discussing bias and the sources of our story, we are now presented with a new batch of characters who will affect things. During that same fateful year, Ser Criston Cole was appointed to the Kingsguard to fill the place created by the death of the legendary Sir Rhaenyra Redwyne. Born the son of a steward in service to Lord Dondarrion of Blackhaven, Ser Criston was a comely young knight of 23 years. He first came to the attention of the court when he won the melee held at Maidenpool in honor of King Viserys' ascension. In the final moments of the fight, Ser Criston knocked Dark Sister from Prince Daemon's hand with his Morningstar, to the delight of his grace and the fury of the prince. Afterward, he gave the 7-year-old Princess Rhaenyra the victor's laurel and begged for her favor to wear in the joust. In the lists, he defeated Prince Daemon once again, and unhorsed both the celebrated Cargyle twins, Ser Auric and Ser Eric of the Kingsguard, before falling to Lord Lymond Mallister. And so here we are introduced to Ser Criston Cole, the man who will eventually be the kingmaker and hand of Aegon II, and the possible love interest of Princess Rhaenyra. Now there is quite a bit here in this paragraph to talk about, especially with regard to perspective and bias. Now again, it should be noted that neither Septon Eustace or Mushroom are fans of Criston Cole, with each painting him rather poorly. Which is notable as Archmaester Gyldayn chooses to use neither of them as sources to introduce the man. Instead, Criston Cole is presented as a great knight, making us think that he was honorable. Notice all the effort in this paragraph to portray him this way. He is talked about as a Kingsguard who replaced the legendary Rhaenyra Redwyne. He is called comely, a tourney champion at Maidenpool, the location of the tale of Jonquil and Florian. He bravely defeated Daemon Targaryen in the melee and the joust, as well as members of the Kingsguard, and he wore the favor of the 7-year-old princess in the lists, performing admirably. Except on closer examination, Ser Criston Cole's actions are rather dishonorable. So, first things first, George R. R. Martin made a mistake in his writing. A Morningstar is a mace with spikes on it, and a flail is a spiked ball on a chain, though it's sometimes called a chained Morningstar. Our author has mixed up Morningstar and flail, though he is very consistent with his mistake. Ser Criston Cole is wielding a flail, a spiked ball on a chain, which is a horrible weapon for a tourney. Flails are very powerful, spiked, and are designed to fly around shields and hit people. They are also incredibly imprecise. In fact, their imprecision is why they weren't actually used very much in the real world, despite being all over fantasy stories. It's absolutely reckless that Ser Criston Cole is using one in a melee, when others are likely using blunted swords. Him using a flail shows a complete and utter disregard for others' safety. Let's remember that later on, Ser Criston Cole kills Joffrey Lonmouth in a tourney. Now, the same is also true of Daemon Targaryen. He is entering the melee with not just live steel, an insanely sharp Valyrian steel weapon. He has a bit more precision since it's a sword, but all of these characters are on horseback, hopping up and down. And the Valyrian sword and the flail are clearly there to scare people, just as Thoros of Myr used a flaming blade in the hand's tourney. In fact, this parallel to Thoros is perhaps highlighted by the fact that both House Cole and Thoros of Myr serve a Dondarrion. Daemon and Criston are both absolutely cheating. It is no coincidence that the final men in the melee are using live weapons instead of tourney swords. And while we can often discount the testimony of Septon Eustace and Mushroom in their trashing of Criston Cole and Daemon Targaryen, this very public performance of Criston and Daemon cannot be dismissed. They were 100% reckless cheaters. Now, melees usually go until the pack of men and horses is good and tired, or until there is one man left riding. This appears to be a last man standing situation. So while it is rather courageous that Criston Cole took on a man wielding live Valyrian steel, Ser Criston also made it very dangerous for Daemon Targaryen. Again, the flail is very powerful and rather imprecise, and instead of aiming at Daemon's shield or armor to unhorse him, Criston swung at Daemon's sword, and could have easily hit his hand or arm, which probably would have shattered it. Put in this light, Daemon's fury is rather justified, but again it's difficult to have any sympathy for someone using a Valyrian steel blade in a melee. With his pale green eyes, coal-black hair, and easy charm, Cole soon became a favorite of all the ladies at court. Not the least among them, Rhaenyra Targaryen herself. So smitten was she by the charms of the man she called my White Knight, that Rhaenyra begged her father to name Ser Criston her own personal shield and protector. His Grace indulged her in this, as in so much else. Thereafter, Ser Criston always wore her favor in the lists and became a fixture at her side during feasts and frolics. So next we get a physical description of Criston Cole, black hair and green eyes, and Archmaester Gyldain writes of how Princess Rhaenyra fancied Ser Criston. Now regarding Ser Criston's looks, we know that later in the story Rhaenyra Targaryen will have 3 brown-haired children, and there will be a huge rumor that the 3 children are bastards, as Laenor Velaryon and Rhaenyra both had silver hair. Now it's important to note that many characters in Ice and Fire are dumb when it comes to genetics, and think that hair color follows either the mother or the father. And this has led many in the fandom to wrongly believe that this is how the world works in Ice and Fire as well. You get a physical feature from one's father or one's mother, and that's it. Of course, this is hogwash, and there's plenty of people in the story whose hair doesn't match their parents'. Sansa being a prime example with light auburn hair, with 2 parents who both had darker hair. And of course in the real world we know why this is. Genetics is complicated. There's recessive genes, randomly activated genes, multiple gene combinations coming together. One cannot simply look at one's parents' hair color to determine what the child's hair color will be. That would be outrageously simplistic, and let's remember that George R. R. Martin was a sci-fi author who wrote about genetics. He knows very well that looking at just one's parents to determine hair color would be ridiculous. Still, Archmaester Gyldain is clearly trying to trick the reader with genetics. He wants the reader to believe that Rhaenyra's children are bastards by Harwin Strong, and so he tells us that Criston Cole, a possible father to at least Rhaenyra's son Jace, is black-haired. His hair doesn't match Jace's hair. Now let's keep in mind that very few people in Fire and Blood get physical descriptions. We don't know the hair color of many important characters like Aemma Arryn or her father Roderick, or Alicent Hightower or her father Otto. But Criston Cole's hair color is provided as it serves a particular function. It is told in an attempt to clear him of being Jace's father. Now regarding Rhaenyra's affections, our author and Gyldain like to confuse us with the passage of time, and there is a lot he is implying here with the twisting of events. He is saying that Rhaenyra was so smitten with Cole that she called him my White Knight. Except Criston becomes a Kingsguard and her protector, so he is literally her White Knight. The phrasing makes it seem like Rhaenyra is metaphorically calling him this gallant character from her perspective, but she may just be factually calling him what he is. Additionally, begging her father to name Criston her protector is phrased in a manner as if the girl is in love with him, but he also just proved himself a great fighter. It may very well be that she just appreciated his abilities and wanted the best to guard her. And being a fixture at her side also implies some sort of bond between the two, but protecting her is literally his job. And even if there is a bond, it's also quite a jump to assume that this bond is romantic. Joffrey certainly liked the Hound, but no one thought that Joffrey was in love with the Hound. But even ignoring all of this, and assuming that Rhaenyra is genuinely smitten romantically with Criston Cole, we must remember that Rhaenyra is 8 years old when Criston becomes a Kingsguard, and the opinions of an 8-year-old are not necessarily the opinions of a 10-year-old, or a 12-year-old, or a 14-year-old. Archmaester Gyldain is trying to establish a static, unchanging fact on the relationship between Cole and Rhaenyra, when it may change quite a bit. The point I am making is that the text is very ambiguous. There is no real evidence that there was any affection between Rhaenyra and Criston Cole at any point in the story, and there is no real evidence that there wasn't great affection between them and that he is the father of her eldest child. We simply don't know. We know what various characters around them want us to believe, but we don't really have any hard evidence one way or the other. Not long after Ser Criston donned his white cloak, King Viserys invited Lionel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal, to join the small council as Master of Laws. A big man, burly and balding, Lord Strong enjoyed a formidable reputation as a battler. Those who did not know him oft took him for a brute, mistaking his silences and slowness of speech for stupidity. This was far from the truth. Lord Lionel had studied at the Citadel as a youth, earning 6 links of his chain before deciding that a maester's life was not for him. He was literate and learned, his knowledge of the laws of the Seven Kingdom exhaustive. Thrice wed and thrice a widower, the Lord of Harrenhal brought 2 maiden daughters and 2 sons to court with him. The girls became handmaids to Princess Rhaenyra, whilst their elder brother, Sir Harwin Strong, called Breakbones, was made a captain in the Gold Cloaks. The younger boy, Larys the Clubfoot, joined the king's confessors. Next, we hear about the Strongs, Lionel and his sons Harwin and Larys, along with 2 daughters. With Harwin, we're supposed to think of the Mountain, as Harwin is the strongest man in Westeros, and with Larys, we're supposed to think of Varys. Now, the Strongs were brought in after Otto Hightower wanted Daemon Targaryen removed as Master of Law, so it appears that the Strongs, or at least Lionel, was aligned with the Hightowers. It may even be that Daemon was removed as Master of Law specifically so that Lionel and his family could come in. Now, Lionel spent years in Old Town studying at the Citadel, which would have given him ample time to get to know the Hightowers and various maesters. He does appear to be of an age with Otto Hightower. And let's also remember that the Council of 101 took place at Harrenhal, so any conspiracy to pass over Rhaenyra and Laenor likely included coordination with Lionel. Now, it's a very peculiar situation that Lionel studied at the Citadel. Usually the Citadel is for non-inheriting men to become maesters. It seems that Lionel had an older brother who died, and so he cancelled his maester plans. So it's rather clear that the Strongs were brought in to be spies. Harwin goes to the Gold Cloaks, where Daemon is, 2 strong daughters become Rhaenyra's handmaidens, and Larys, who is a clear parallel to Varys, becomes a confessor. That is, a torturer who gets information from people in the Black Cells. Larys later becomes Master of Whisperers, by the way, like Varys, and his first role is clearly a parallel to Varys' moonlighting gig as Rugen the Jailer. They are a family of knowledge and information gathering. Now, it's rather notable that we do not know what the Strongs look like, other than Lionel being balding, them all being large, and Larys having a clubfoot. And this is rather telling, as Archmaester Gyldayn definitely pushes the idea that Harwin Strong fathered Rhaenyra's 3 sons, even when none of the official sources, that is, the Grand Maester, Septon Eustace, or Mushroom, say that this was the case. Instead, Archmaester Gyldayn resorts to saying, "Mushroom says as much" in his testimony, and Grand Maester Mellos hints at it. Of course, saying something is as much or hinting at is not saying it's true. Or at least it's not saying it's true with evidence. Even Septon Eustace, who does not like Rhaenyra, says that the rumors of Harwin fathering the children are false. Not that any of them had eyes inside Rhaenyra's bedroom. Had the Strongs shared the brown hair and brown eyes of Rhaenyra's children, one would think that Gyldayn would have said so, but he doesn't. Instead, he just mentions that Lionel is balding, and he is completely silent on the looks of Harwin, Larys, and the 2 daughters. In fact, the only Strong that we know the hair color of is Lionel's bastard Alice Rivers, who had black hair. Of course, the paternity issue will come up a bunch later, and we will discuss it more then. But for now, it's just worth noting that we generally do not know what the Strongs look like, because Gyldayn has an agenda. Now, it's also worth noting that because Larys is a parallel to Varys, we must question his clubfoot. Varys is by trade a mummer and spent years painstakingly putting on the character of Rugen the Jailer, and we don't know how much of Varys is a show in itself. There is a question of whether Larys is putting on the character of the clubfoot so that when he ventures out in disguise as someone else, people do not suspect it's him. It is worth noting that Larys' foot is chopped off upon his death and disappears, leaving us with no proof that he actually had a clubfoot. Thus did matters stand in King's Landing late in the year 105 AC, when Queen Aemma was brought to bed in Maegor's Holdfast and died whilst giving birth to the son that Viserys Targaryen had desired for so long. The boy, named Balon after the king's father, survived her only by a day, leaving king and court bereft. Save perhaps for Prince Daemon, who was observed in a brothel on the Street of Silk, making drunken japes with his highborn cronies about the heir for a day. When word of this got back to the king, legend says it was the whore sitting in Daemon's lap who informed on him, but evidence suggests it was actually one of his drinking companions, a captain in the Gold Cloaks, eager for advancement. Viserys became livid. His grace had finally had a surfeit of his ungrateful brother and his ambitions. And so here we find that Aemma Arryn dies in childbirth, and a day later, her and Viserys' newborn son dies as well. Then, supposedly, Daemon makes some drunken jokes at a bar, mocking the babe as heir for a day, which gets back to Viserys and makes him angry. Now, as I mentioned last time, it is too much of a coincidence that Otto Hightower would be writing his brother fearing Daemon's heir status only to have the problem resolve itself. Also, it's a remarkably boneheaded move from Daemon. Either the event didn't happen or someone else made the joke. Regardless, Otto Hightower was clearly responsible for this joke getting pinned on Daemon. The question is, how exactly? Well, Gildain claims that perhaps one of two people came forward to inform on Daemon, a sex worker and a Gold Cloak captain. The Gold Cloak captain is clearly supposed to be Harwin Strong. He is the only Gold Cloak captain in the story we know by name, and called a captain in just the previous paragraph. And the rest of the Gold Cloaks are fiercely loyal to Daemon. That said, the Gold Cloak captain is supposed to be looking to rise the ranks, and Harwin never does rise. Also, if it were Harwin, why wouldn't Archmaester Gildain simply say so? It's odd that he implies something when he says he has evidence. Additionally, it would be odd that Viserys would trust the testimony of just one person, which makes me think that both a Gold Cloak captain, perhaps Harwin, perhaps not, and a sex worker testified to the joke. Of course, it's Larys Strong who works as a confessor and who will eventually rise to be Master of Whisperers. He is the one that works with rumors and benefits under the reign of Viserys. He must have been seen to be good with finding out information in order to rise in the profession. And so I would say that it's likely that Otto Hightower had Larys Strong bring testimony against Daemon, either through paying or torturing people, the sex worker and the Gold Cloak captain, who may or may not be Harwin Strong. Once his mourning for his wife and son had run its course, the king moved swiftly to resolve the long-simmering issue of the succession. Disregarding the precedents set by King Jaehaerys in 92 and the Great Council in 101, Viserys declared his daughter Rhaenyra to be his rightful heir, and named her Princess of Dragonstone. In a lavish ceremony at King's Landing, hundreds of lords did obeisance to the realm's delight as she sat at her father's feet at the base of the Iron Throne, swearing to honor and defend her right of succession. So the paragraph begins with a weird statement saying that once Viserys' mourning ran its course, he moved swiftly. First off, we all know that's not how mourning works. You don't feel bad and then suddenly it stops. Gildain is weirdly trying to claim that Viserys experienced the proper amount of mourning and then ceased to do so. But of course, we also know that Viserys marries Alicent Hightower within a year, with her catching his eye and him wanting to marry her sometime before that. And there were rumors that they were already having an affair, and we know that Rhaenyra was made Viserys' cupbearer, and she was always around, implying that Viserys was an absolute drunk. Needless to say, the mourning situation was complicated. That said, the swift movement to name Rhaenyra heir did seem to actually happen, as the next year is rather packed for Daemon Targaryen. After Rhaenyra is named heir, Daemon leaves, spends 6 months on Dragonstone, has his argument about the dragon egg, then goes to the Vale, hears about Mysaria's miscarriage and Viserys' betrothal, and travels to Driftmark to plan for a war with Corlys, then goes through the huge task of assembling an army of landless adventurers and second sons, and then travels to the Stepstones with his army to start a war. All still in the year 106. We will get back to this packed schedule later on, as there is some stuff we can deduce from it. Now, of course, we get Gildain once again claiming that there was some sort of iron precedent from Jaehaerys' decision to pass over Rhaenys for Baelon in 92 and the Great Council of 101 regarding the inability of women to rule. There, of course, wasn't. If anything, both situations simply reinforce the idea that it's the king's choice who would succeed him. Jaehaerys chose Baelon in 92, and then chose Viserys in 101 after the Great Council's ruling. Viserys is choosing his successor, just like Jaehaerys did. In fact, we see a clear contradiction in Gildain's language. He claims succession was a long-simmering issue, as if there was doubt. That argument was in fact still going on, and for a long time at that, which is rather odd as Viserys only became king in 103. How is this a long-simmering issue? Less than 2 years? Jaehaerys named Aemon his heir 14 years into his reign. And if the Council of 101 was so binding and so recent, wouldn't everyone see Daemon as the 100% heir? Now, this isn't to say that Viserys' ability to choose an heir was seen as solid either. Viserys felt the need to have a lavish ceremony for Rhaenyra and have lords swear oaths to her, which clearly shows that many people did perceive Daemon as the true heir. It should be noted that there was no ceremony in the naming of Balon or Viserys as heir, though there was a ceremony and feast in the naming of Aemon. Regardless, it's clear that Viserys knew naming Rhaenyra was controversial. The ceremony was evidence of that. There was in fact argument over succession. And this is a good place to stop. In part 10 we'll discuss Daemon's dragon egg and the marriage of Viserys to Alicent. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.